Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This next session is on sharing water, oil, fish and landing slots. And our first speaker is David Triggs. As you know, David is on the executive of the IU and chairman of the Henry George Foundation of Great Britain. Now retired, David was for 40 years a chartered engineer by profession, specialising in water and environmental management consultancy, working throughout the UK and worldwide, mainly in developing countries on both small village projects and mega projects in capital cities. He studied engineering at Imperial College London and business administration and management at the Management College in Henley. Over time, the overriding importance of the politico-economic environment to the success or failure of otherwise sound technical and managerial solutions to business and social problems came to demand more of his attention. He saw the practical consequences of failure to provide sensible and just systems for the payment of water and environmental services, and in particular the limitations of market-based solutions that failed to take the locational value implications of such services into account. His interest in political economy started in the 60s with introduction to the works of Henry George. Since that time, he has studied and taught economics at the School of Economic Science in London and with the Henry George Foundation of Great Britain. Key to his attraction to the ideas of Henry George is George's emphasis upon the laws of nature and the need for man to recognise these and work in harmony with them in designing systems for the benefit of the whole community. In this, he sees a parallel with the respect and importance that engineers must attach to the laws of nature when designing, building, maintaining and operating works that really benefit people. Thanks, Dave.
Hello again. Well, you'll now appreciate why I was stressing natural law earlier. What you might now be in a position to appreciate is what I have to say about water, and to the extent that it's so, the extent to which I'm qualified to speak on water. What I'm going to tell is a very simple, easy story about one aspect of water, essentially public water suppliers in the developing countries, and in particular my experience in India, in Bangladesh, in the Yemen, in Malawi and Kenya and South Africa and various other places where there's very simply not enough water to go round. In almost every city in those places there simply isn't enough water to go round, and so the normal procedure under such arrangements is to ration water, and the normal practical rationing is that the system is operated intermittently. So generally speaking, the public water supply then is on in any particular area of a city or a town that's got a public water supply, a piped public water supply that is, it is an intermittent supply. And what that means is that every day the water is on for so many hours a day and then off for so many hours of the day. And a simple fact of piped water systems is that they leak. Full pipe systems leak outwards. When pipes are empty, they are prone to leak inwards. Given that public sanitation services invariably lag water supply services, it's not too difficult to imagine, and in fact to observe, what empty pipes leak inwards with sewage. So my observation over many years in the third world is that every public water supply system that is operating under such a system is contaminated every day. What we are delivering under those circumstances is a contaminated public water supply system. So that was the challenge as far as I was concerned in relation to organising and advising on public water supply systems. And not only is it a problem of quality, of course there is also a problem of quantity, insofar as what it generally means is that the poor can have very, very little or none, and the rich can usually avail themselves of sufficient, because what tends to happen, let's suppose the water supply is on for 2 hours a day in any one area, then when the water supply is on, those that can afford it have a big tank in their house or on their premises, and a big pump and a big pipe, suck from the mains supply and fill their water tank during that time. The consequence is that those that live either remote from the source works or near at an elevated position, because as you'll remember water runs downhill, will go short. So the challenge was not only quantity but quality. And I hit upon this notion that what we really should be doing with public water supplies is ensuring that everybody gets a public supply of a minimum level before anybody gets a discretionary supply. Because one of the unique features of water as a resource, as a commodity, is that it is both an absolute necessity, people die without it, and it is the height of luxury. The same thing, unchanged in any way. What one man will use to sprinkle and create a beautiful lawn in his garden, another man is utterly dependent to stay alive. Alongside this, and most of my experience was in working with the World Bank and other international funding agencies, and they are absolutely convinced of the merit of the market economy. So the one thing that gets promoted everywhere is water meters. You've got to meter the water so that we can measure how much everybody gets and charge them on the basis of a metered supply. Failing to notice that when the pipes are empty, half the time you're measuring air, and half the time the water meter is running backwards. So metered water supplies under these circumstances is a complete nonsense, but an utterly corruptible nonsense. So that one of the finest jobs you can get in such circumstances is to be a water meter reader. Because you do deals. The water meter figure means nothing. So it's all negotiable. So you negotiate. The water meter reader negotiates. Well, actually that's not quite right, because it's such a good deal that what you do is you don't actually meet the reader yourself or even go round. You just do the visits and collect the thing and do the deal. So anyway, what I became convinced of is that this market approach to water supply at this level was totally inadequate and in fact destructive, and the service that we were rendering in a conventional way was actually poisoning people. And when you realise that waterborne diseases are the main killers in most of these places, that really rather matters. So anyway, I hit upon a system by which I could ensure and guarantee that everybody within a community was delivered of a public water supply system, but only at a very small level. 40 litres per head per day is the World Health Organization standard for public water supplies that's necessary for public health purposes. So I devised a system in which everybody could be delivered of such an amount. But it was a rather unconventional system. What I used was drip irrigation technology, not what is commonly referred to as public water supply technology. And the secret of it was a valve that delivered at a constant flow rate, irrespective of the pressure, so that I could put on every supply, and of course now we're talking about thin cables of the order of this size, not half-inch or 2-inch pipes. But sorry, I could have used this size, couldn't I? That would have been better still. So that's the supply. That's the water supply pipe, is of that sort of size. But it feeds continuously, drip feeding into each household's storage tank. Everyone had to have a storage tank anyway, but now I'm only going to drip feed it. So what I could then ensure, and let's just suppose that I'm serving a zone of 1,000 properties, of which I will be guaranteeing to give 40 litres per head per day to each of those properties because of this controlled supply. But now I've got more than enough water to go round. So what I now discover that within this 1,000 properties, I can make 100, let's say, 2-star services. I can make 50, let's say, 3-star services, and 20 4-star services, and 5 5-star services. What am I bid? Such a simple question. What am I bid? Now I can discover what the market value of water is compared with the necessity for water. And what this reflects, in my opinion, is the fundamental principle that George identified as free land at the margin. So that at the basic level, everybody is able to live. But if you want a preferential rate for something that is scarce, you pay for it. And you pay for it because you're competing with other people who would like that scarce resource. But the duty of the community under those circumstances is to make sure that everybody has a fundamental supply before anybody gets a discretionary supply. And so I identify here the boundary, in relation to public water supplies, of the distinction between what's a necessary and essential public service and what's a commercial operation. Of course, what you would very quickly discover is that when people are bidding now for these 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, 2-star services, we're going to collect infinitely more money than it's ever cost us to supply the water. So the water supply for everybody at a basic level becomes free as a fundamental service. But people will pay then for the enhanced level that they require. An exact reflection of land value and prime sites attracting prime premiums. So I see that as a very simple example of the importance of distinguishing between that which is essential and that which is discretionary. I have to add, that wasn't very welcome amongst any of the places where I worked. And it certainly wasn't welcome at the World Bank or the ODA, or I have to say even the likes of Oxfam and the like. There are all sorts of interests involved in public water supplies. And the scope and entrenched corruption that happens to be there it is a feature. I think it's fair to say it's a feature. And here I was, an innocent, coming from the Metropolitan Water Board, Thames Water Authority, Greater London Council, Main Drainage Department, all previous employers of myself, now trying to tell people in the inverted commas developing countries how they might supply their water. But of course you do get enormous cultural barriers when you try to sell this locally and people say, is this what you do in England? Oh no, we don't do this. We don't need to do this. Oh, we want what you've got. Why can't we have what you've got? And the answer that what we've got doesn't work here is not good enough. So you have a massive cultural thing, you've got a massive corruption thing. The best example, of course, that I had of that, I guess, was in Yemen, where I was supposed to be involved in developing a national policy for water supply, and the capital city there is Sana'a. The water now is half a mile below ground as the groundwater table is disappearing. And all the water, as many of you will probably know, or much of the water is used for growing cat, the drug that people like to chew. And most of the wells are controlled by the bandits that control the cat production. So here am I going around advising as to how you might do this technically, but somewhat frustrated by the Kalashnikovs that are telling me very clearly, oh no, you won't. That's not the way we do things here. So the message that I take in that context is that a mere technical solution does not solve the problem if we have a fundamentally cultural condition in which corruption, dishonesty prevails. And sadly, throughout, these have become normal. This mode of behaviour has become normal. So that the policemen, the politicians, the peons, the clerks and everybody all take backhanders. They have to. They can't live on the wages they get. But we have a system there that makes practical, technical solutions extraordinarily difficult, well, in my view, impossible. And that's why I changed my focus of activity, not from propounding technical solutions purely, but focusing upon the essence of the issue, which is fundamentally, as I've already indicated, ethical. But I just would pause, if I've got a couple more minutes, I'll just pause for a couple of minutes on this, because I think it has a relevance for this free land at the margin. And now just consider this in relation to water, because of course I've just been speaking about the use of this scarce resource for public water supplies. But water is being demanded for all sorts of other things, for manufacturing, for trading, for decorative purposes and all sorts. And that has to become a social decision expressing the will of that community. Now, if that community wills that first of all we shall provide everybody with a basic supply, and then they decide that we need certain levels of manufacturing and certain levels of agriculture and certain levels of amenity, then they will have to allocate their overall resource to each of those functions. And I would suggest you then have that same principle applied, that at the margin of every desirable activity, it's freely available. But there's only a limited margin. And beyond the margin, there becomes a charge. And I see that as being reflected in the use of land also. Because what I'm acutely conscious is in relation to economic activities, every form of economic activity is marginal somewhere. Whether it be a high street shop, or whether it be a manufacturing, or whether it be an artistic enterprise, at some place it will be marginal. And we don't want to charge anybody that's involved in a marginal activity, especially if the corporation the community as a whole decides that that activity is worthy. Now currently, we license unworthy, or what we judge to be unworthy activities, it seems to me. So we can have licensed betting shops, we can have licensed brothels, we have licensed premises for certain forms of activity. But all I'm saying is that that's a negative, that's controlling. What I would like to see is positive land use planning, but that recognises this principle that I've enunciated very, very briefly, but in relation to water. Okay? Thank you.